Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Ulrich, and I am the director of NYU Washington, D.C. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Abramson Family Auditorium for tonight's event, a film screening and panel discussion of Bonjour Ji, an award-winning Canadian short film examining an interplay of misperceptions and hurdles that are part of migrants' daily experience around the world. NYU DC has hosted previous events about migration, and we are grateful for the opportunity to continue this important discussion. Tonight's event is part of the Global Migration Film Festival, and we are pleased to partner with the UN's International Organization for Migration, IOM. Through this initiative, IOM and its partners aim at changing the negative perceptions and attitudes towards migrants and refugees. The film screening will be followed by a panel discussion to reflect on the role of storytelling and art as vehicles for encouraging creative expression in order to have more inclusive dialogues and for passing on information on migration and migrants themselves. In a world marked by physical and technological mobility, this film and panel discussion provides an important opportunity for us to reflect on these issues. I am pleased to introduce Luca Dalloglio, which I totally screwed up that name, sorry, Chief of Mission at the UN Migration Agency. A sociologist by training, he has dedicated a large part of his career to issues related to population stabilization, post-crisis transition and recovery, with extensive field assignments in the Horn of Africa, Mozambique, Haiti, Guatemala, and Kosovo. Welcome to NYU DC.
Thank you, Director Ulrich. You treated my family name very well. Welcome, everybody. My name is Luca Dalloglio. I'm the director of the IOM Washington office here in Washington. Welcome at this second edition of the Global Migration Film Festival. We are very proud to have this association with New York University, and thankful to the director and thankful to Tom McGuire, our partner in the organization of this event, the Director of External Affairs here at New York University. This is the second year that IOM organizes this event. The Migration Film Festival is not one single event. It's a series of events spread over almost 2 weeks, from the 5th of December through the 18th of December. Last year, we reached out probably to some 10,000 viewers, 200 events, some 80 countries participated in this initiative. This year, I think we are keeping up. More than 100 countries have joined the Migration Film Festival. The number of events has multiplied. We hope to have tens of thousands of viewers. Also, the number of movies, short films, has mushroomed, and there is a participation that is very diversified, very global in spirit with the IOM approach. This event is sandwiched between the anniversary of the creation of IOM, which is on the 5th of December. The organization is now 66 years old, and the celebration for the International Migrants Day, which is on the 18th of December. The festival is based on the role of visual arts as promoters of mutual understanding, dialogue, and communication on international migration. Many members of the panel that we have tonight have engaged personally in the artistic life to portray exactly this. I'm thankful for your presence here tonight, and also very thankful, and I want to recognize the IOM Deputy Director General, Ambassador Laura Thompson, to be here. Thank you very much for your presence and for participating in this event. IOM's first global forum was a Global Migration Film Festival. As I said, initiated a year ago. We have added in a number of movies, we've had a number of locations, but we also have added a number of partners, both from the private and private sector. One of these partners is USA for IOM, the non-profit partner here in the United States, a non-profit organization, 501c3, that is accompanying us, reaching out to the private sector. We continue also to work with a campaign launched by the UN Secretary General called Together, that aims at promoting a positive perception of migrants and refugees, and to challenge the prevailing negative stereotypes about migrants and migration, leading to xenophobia and the risk of discrimination worldwide. Thank you again for being here tonight. And I pass on the mic to the Master of Ceremony, my colleague, Ager Naili. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Luca. So as Luca just said, my name is Ager Naili. I am the Communications and Social Media Coordinator at the International Organization for Migration here in Washington, D.C. So first, I would also like to join Luca and thank each of you for joining us tonight and be part of the second edition of the Global Migration Film Festival. And I would also like to thank our host and partner, the Washington campus of the New York University. So before watching the movie tonight, I'm going to ask right now to Leonard Doyle, who is the head of communications at the International Organization for Migration. He's coming straight from Geneva. And Ahmed Badr, who is the CEO and founder of Narratio, to join me now right here. So take a seat. Good evening, Leonard and Ahmed.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So Leonard, you are, let's say it, you're the mastermind behind this Global Migration Film Festival. That is the second edition, as we just mentioned. So I would like to give you a chance to say a few words about this initiative, but I also believe that you're having something in the making with Ahmed, and I think it's about time to tell us what it is.
Definitely. We'll save that for a second. Sometimes, we have ideas, and sometimes they die, and sometimes they grow. This one began over a beer and a pizza in Geneva with some of the colleagues in the media unit in IOM. In particular, a young Brazilian lady called Amanda Nero, who sort of said, why not have a film festival? And you're part of it now. So we're 2 years on the go. And let me tell you that during these 2 weeks, there's a caravan leaving Niamey in the center of Niger, country you don't hear about too often, and if you do hear about it, it's often sad news. And this caravan will drive 1,000 miles towards the Algerian border, meeting migrants along the way, playing films like this one you're seeing tonight, encouraging debates and encouraging discussions. In the same way, in the detention centers for migrants in Libya, they will be playing these films. It's not all in sad places. In Paris, in Rome, in Indonesia, hundreds of coffee shops are playing these films, as well as a big theater sponsored by USAID. So we feel that the train is starting to move, and one of the things I've always thought about is when we talk about xenophobia and anti-migrant feeling and all of this kind of thing, people in the UN tend to get all worked up about it and sort of say, how can we message back? And I kind of like to say, there's a reason Hollywood is filled with so many wealthy people and with movies that are cranking out huge amounts of money, because they know how to tell stories. So the idea we have here is to leave it to the storytellers to tell the stories.
So maybe now you can tell us, what are you doing with Ahmed? Well, you've been working a lot lately.
We've been trying to keep this a secret. But Ahmed, we've known, he's came to us through the I'm a Migrant platform, I believe, some time ago. Very talented young man. And we had, again, another idea that seems to be gaining pace, to have a podcast. So we thought it would be really good for the United States in particular to hear from migrants and refugees, to hear about their lives, to hear about what is it like to live as the in-betweenies, the sons of, the children of people who came as refugees, or in Ahmed's case, he himself came as a refugee. Because they're a kind of vital component in this society. Which way will they go? Will they become full-blooded Americans, embracing the culture? Or will, as so often happens in other parts of the world in particular, will they feel a little bit disenfranchised, and that can lead to terrible trouble? So the podcast is ready to go. Hopefully you'll hear a little bit about it soon.
Yes, we are going to play 2 excerpts from the podcast. Ahmed, do you want to say a few words, or should I play this right now?
Yeah, I think just to echo what Leonard was saying, so this past, it's been, 5-6 months now, I traveled across the U.S. I went to Texas, New York City, Utah, and spoke with individuals like myself, youth refugees, youth migrants, and asked them questions like, what does it mean to be American? What was your first memory like in America? Anything from that to what was your favorite thing in school? And so one thing that I really learned through these interviews and through these episodes, which will all be released on International Migrants Day, that's Monday, I really learned that the word migrant and the word refugee can mean so many different things, and it's so important to not think of these words in the abstract. And I sincerely hope that by listening to this podcast, listening to these stories and these journeys, that those words become more than just labels and become really things that are humanized and really not abstracted. So we have 2 clips for you. The first clip we're going to play is a thank you letter from the bomb that visited my home 11 years ago. I wrote this piece last year. This is the incident that changed my life forever. So I thought to myself, why don't I take the perspective of the thing that hurt me the most and see what I can learn from it? So that's the first clip. And the second clip we'll play is when I spoke with my friend Espoir. This is in the first season of the podcast, and asking him about his first day in America. I knew that it was going to change your life. I knew that as soon as I entered your old home in Baghdad. Your dad, Matham, was holding your sister, Maryam, in the kitchen. Your mom, Hannah, was near the dryer. I found a place between them. You were away at your grandparents' home, so we didn't get to meet. You didn't know this at the time, but I was a dud missile, designed to destroy but not explode. I entered your home through the bathroom window, made my way through the walls of the kitchen cabinet, and sneaked through 3 natural gas canisters. You know, those old ones your mom used for cooking? I'm sorry for leaving gaping holes through each one. I was in a rush. How was that first week in America?
Man, I feel like I was a kid in like a kinder store.
And how old were you?
I was 9. I got outside, just like, whoa, they got swings. Like, they got a pool? Like, are you serious?
Yeah.
Like, this is crazy. I think I spent like almost every day at the pool.
Yeah.
Going to the zoos and things like that. I was just like, this is amazing.
So this podcast is going to be launched on December 18th, right, on Monday. Where people can find this podcast?
It'll be available across all major podcasting platforms, mainly on iTunes and Stitcher and anywhere you go to listen to podcasts.
Anything else you would like to add?
Well, maybe I can just say that many of you are maybe in New York over next Monday. There's a really terrific exhibit happening there. It's opened already, and it'll last until the 2nd of January. It's at UNICEF House, which is on First Avenue, right in front of the UN. And it contains an art installation which Ahmed did the voices for, and his friend Mohammed did these extraordinary designs and of miniature buildings of the experiences of people from around the world who've had to flee their homes. The podcast dovetails perfectly with that, because all of the stories that Ahmed collected are part of that exhibit. The artist has been written up in the New York Times and the New Yorker, and we're really proud of it, and we think it's going to gain a lot of attention, a lot of interest.
And there is actually a flyer about this event that Leonard just mentioned on the registration table. If you did not pick it up, it's going to be still upstairs as you leave. So make sure to get that with you as you go home. Well, I'm going to let you, Leonard and Ahmed, go back to your seats. And it is now time to watch the movie. Set in Montreal. Thank you. Set in Montreal, Bonjour Ji by Satinder Kassawana is a story about the communication gap between different communities who live and work amongst each other every day. And despite being born in Montreal, Roop Singh, the main character, struggles not only with how he is perceived by others, but also how he perceived them. So let's watch the movie now. I still remember my first full day in the United States. I woke up in the morning, jet-lagged. I had traveled from France the night before. So I woke up in the morning quite early, and I decided to go out for a walk to explore the neighborhood. I was renting a room in a shared loft that I had found on Airbnb. It was located between Chinatown and Soho, one of the busiest areas in New York City. I loved it though. So I go out and I go to Starbucks. The young man who was working at Starbucks that morning looks at me, smiles, and says, "Hi, how are you? What can I get for you today?" And instead of telling him that I wanted a latte with half and half milk, I stared at him. I stared at him for about 20 seconds straight. And 20 seconds of awkward silence can feel very long. I eventually asked for my latte, but I kept staring at him and asking myself, have I ever met this young man before? I couldn't remember meeting him prior to that moment. So I thought, well, since he's being so nice and casual, asking me how am I doing, must be hating on me. But he wasn't trying to make conversation either, so I was confused. I didn't know what was happening at this exact moment. Anyway, I picked up my latte and I went on with my morning until I stepped into a fashion store. The saleswoman walks over and asks, "Hi, how are you? How can I help you today?" I didn't know what to reply. I just stupidly smiled at her. And at this exact moment, I realized that there were some forms of misunderstandings. I just didn't know what were the misunderstandings. And to be quite honest with you, the French woman in me felt a little bit annoyed. How come these New Yorkers that I had never met before could be so casual and ask me, how am I doing? But I traveled to New York unprepared. I didn't read anything about the American culture, about New Yorkers, about the codes, the customs, the traditions, the greetings, nothing. I just watched a lot of American movies and TV shows, and I thought that it would be sufficient, but far from it. Eventually, later on that day, I learned that the "how are you" was part of the standard greetings in America. So neither the young man at Starbucks nor the saleswoman at the fashion store were hitting on me. But I couldn't know. And later on that same day, I also learned that I shouldn't try answering the question, "How are you doing?" because 90% of the time they don't care. So how are you doing tonight, guys? I'm part of this 10% who do care, so please, how are you doing tonight, guys? Great. So I just shared a story, and this story shows the importance, and this is a true story, that shows the importance of learning about each other's if we want to avoid some forms of disconnect. And one of the best ways to learn about each other's is through sharing stories. Stories help us create a real bond and real connections. So this is what we will be discussing tonight, how stories can bring us closer as individuals and as societies, how stories can eventually change perceptions about the others who look different than us, the others who speak a different language than us, the others who are coming from a foreign land to our country to maybe seek better opportunities, or to join their family members here, or maybe because they had to flee, because it was the only way for them to make it alive. Tonight we watch a great movie because films are one form of storytelling, and there are other forms of sharing stories. This is exactly what we will be discussing with our panelists tonight. So I'm going to ask to our panelists to join me right now. We have with us Barbara Cupisti. She's an Italian actress and documentary maker. Barbara, you can join me. We also have Ahmed Badr, who you have already met earlier this evening. He's the CEO and founder of Narratio. We have Richard Johnson, who is a Canadian film artist and visual journalist. Richard, please join us. And Veyron Pax, who is a contemporary artist from Iran. So please, a round of applause for our guests tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tina.
Thank you for being part of this second edition of the Global Migration Film Festival. So if you agree, I will not read your bios because they were distributed earlier, so you have them. And I want us to have more time for the discussion and the Q&A. I will ask our guests a few questions first, and then I will open it to Q&As. So please prepare your questions. And throughout the evening, please, if you tweet or share any post on social media, make sure to use the hashtag MIGFest, MIGFEST. So I'm not reading your bios. However, I would love to hear a little bit about you. So if you could introduce yourself and tell us quickly about your work. You have 1 minute each, as I said earlier.
Okay.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay, I am. Oh, not working. Okay. Okay. Good evening. I am Barbara. I am from Italy. I am a documentary movie film director. What I'm doing, I am going around the world, getting stories, getting interviews, and creating movies to let Western audience understand better why people are fleeing from their home and why they are arriving here. Because how we saw before in the other movie, fear comes from ignorance. Mm-hmm. And what we have to do and what we can do with storytelling, with movies, is destroy the ignorance and try to let the people understand why we are all the same. If you think that in 2050, for United Nations, we will have 200 million, in between 200 and 250 million of refugees for environmental causes also, you can imagine that probably all of us, because if you think about what's happened in California a few days ago, or for the hurricanes, everything, like all these things that happens, so this is closer to us than what we were thinking before. So this is what I'm doing. I'm going around and getting stories, interviewing people, and making movies.
Thank you, Barbara. We'll be watching one of your trailers later on. Ahmed.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ahmed Badr again. I'm a writer and social entrepreneur and former refugee from Iraq. I work a lot with youth refugees and helping them tell their stories through multimedia and through multimedia art installations. My most recent project, obviously, is the Together podcast, but also the Unpacked Refugee Baggage exhibit, which Leonard mentioned earlier today, in which I collaborated with a Syrian artist to visually and tangibly recreate the stories of 10 refugee families. Hamed listened to the stories that I collected and recreated the homes that these refugees and migrants escaped from inside of a series of suitcases. And that obviously is up in New York until January 2nd at UNICEF headquarters.
Richard.
My name is Richard Johnson. I'm a visual artist. I'm obviously not a filmmaker, so I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing here. A long time ago, I went to art college, and mainly for the girls. And there was quite a bit of drinking as well, so drinking and girls. And one of my favorite jokes at the time when someone asked me what I was doing was I would say, I used to be a war artist. And they'd look at me quizzically, and I'd say, no, but now I'm a peace artist, which is funnier in Scotland. So funny story, in 2003, through bad planning and poor decision-making, I ended up crossing the border into Iraq with the US Marine Corps. I was one of 400 journalists packed into every aspect of the military in what was a very well-advertised surprise invasion of Iraq. And my small segment of it was to follow one unit for a prolonged period of time as they made their way through the country. And we didn't try and cover big picture, we covered very much small picture, just the individual soldiers, your 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds who made up that force that swept into Iraq. And a strange thing happened afterwards. We realized that people really connected with the art, that the intimate portraits of these young men and what they were facing, and of the Iraqis and what they were succumbing to, connected with people in a completely different way than anything else did. And ever since then, I've been trying to find ways to use the art to cover refugees, homelessness, cancer survivors, wounded warriors. It just has a way of connecting people. And that's my connection to this tonight, I guess.
Thank you, Richard. Veyron?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Veyron Pax from Iran, a multimedia artist, and I escaped from Iran 7 years ago, and right that time I decided to display my art through visuals and film, and my whole journey been translated to 17 pieces of contemporary cubism and collages, which I just came from Miami, and I had an art exhibition in Spectrum, which was very, very a great experience, and whatever I was seeking for these 7 years to make those art. And also I make film and documentaries. I work for Voice of America Television in DC, and my whole life I was trying to just make art and just transform my thoughts and visions and my messages, which I was getting deeply inside of me, and I felt like I have a message to say it, and I was just trying to say them in any platform that I can, film, visual, and in any other platform. So that's what I'm doing.
Thank you, Veyron, and thanks to each of you. So we will be looking into the work of some of you tonight. But first, I would like to ask you, what did you think of the movie that we just watched, Bonjour Ji? What kind of emotions that movie triggered, and did you relate to any of the characters? Do you want to start, Barbara?
Yeah, I think that the movie was very well done, first of all, and I think that this is a kind of project that we need more, because this kind of short stories that go right inside the problem and go deep inside the problem are the stories that can move something. I am very, very happy to have the possibility to watch these, because also the other fact is how this film will be distributed after. This is something that I wanted to ask you. Is the festival giving the opportunity to these movies to be distributed and shown in other kind of platform, or to be, shared with other people?
Yeah, they're being shared throughout the film festival in different countries. We also share them on our different social media platforms, and throughout the year on digital platforms, we keep sharing them again and again, of course, and through different events that we have.
This is the most important.
Mm-hmm. Ahmed, do you want to say a few things about the movie?
I think the thing that really stuck out to me throughout the whole film, it's not something that is specific really in a specific scene, but overall I loved how accessible the whole film was. It felt like something that anyone at any age could watch and get something from. And I think with filmmaking, that's something that's very, very difficult to do, to create a film that can cater to everyone rather than a specific genre or specific demographic or group of people.
Richard?
I think I enjoyed just the clarity of the diversity in Canada, especially in Montreal and Quebec. It's one of the most diverse places anywhere. I'm surprised that you didn't shoot it in Tim Hortons, though. That was the only critique, I guess, I'd have. I
also very much enjoyed the film, and the most exposing thing I felt through the film was how I felt distressed, which that's what we need from a film. How we get connected, and that's a filmmaker responsibility to be able to get connect to the audience and make a point of view that the audiences can get it and feel it and touch it. That's how we can make change. And this film beautifully and very smoothly showed us the beginning, where they came from and where they are and where they're going for. The perfect short film. I think it was a great short film. I hope you enjoyed it.
Sorry.
You want to add something?
One more thing. I think Barbara alluded to it as well. the films that you're making, and there are many hundreds of them now, they're all reaching an audience, but it's very much this audience as well. So one of the things that's worth discussing, I think, is how you break outside of the audience of people who are obviously going to come to these kind of films, because the people that you need to reach are not this audience. As much as I love this audience, they're not this. You need to find a way to break outside of the bubble that we're all in.
That's a very good point that you're making here, Richard. But Bonjour Ji is very much about personal experiences. So my question to you all, is it possible to rely only on personal experiences and story to depict a global reality? Who wants to start? You want, Veyron?
If you personally be attached to a film, it's so great. But if not, it's okay, because the film should be something that you look at it and you through the vision and also sounds and everything, the effects and everything. It's the film's responsibility to give you that feeling and get something out of it, regardless of who you are and where you're from. And I feel like this film made me personally very connected, because I've had all of those experiences, so I personally felt it very deeply. But I feel it was totally general, because it wasn't one perspective, so it was general, and I think most of people could be very easily be connected to. That's what I think.
Ahmed?
Yeah, I think it starts with the story, and then for that story to be effective in changing people's minds, you have to connect it to an outlet in which people of all different backgrounds will get to experience it. So I think the story is a starting point, but the effort to change people's minds about migration or the refugee experience or what have you, I think needs to be much more planned out and much more precise and more persisting, I think. And specifically, I think when we talk about these global issues and we try to use our art and our own personal experience to give forth or provide this new narrative, it's important to provide multiple narratives of an issue that maybe people will think of as having one narrative. So I think, and this film I think showed it, is that a lot of, when you think of migrant, when you think of refugee, you typically think of blood and war and violence and people fleeing their homes, and that's definitely part of the narrative, but that's not all of it. That's usually where the story starts, but that's not where it ends. So I think as we think about these global issues, we have to start with the story and then move on and present multiple perspectives so that individuals from all different backgrounds can relate. And can understand.
Barbara, do you want to say a few things?
Yes, what I would like to say, is that in narratives, in storytelling, we have to be open to listen everybody. And we don't need to give just one point of view, because the very good thing of this movie is that you have the two parts of the same medal, the two faces of the same medal. You have the two stories that are very interesting, because you can relate to the story from a point of view, from a Western point of view, and you have the possibility to be related to the story from the other point of view. So this is something that, for example, artists, directors, photographers, and writers are very able and very good in doing that. And this is something that sometimes we don't find in journalism, because journalists are trying all the time to get their point of view. So this is the big difference. In news, you have a lot of information, but they are just from one point of view, and they want to get their point of view without taking care of the other side of the story. So this is important for me, and this is the most important thing in narration like this, in movies and literature and photography and podcast, everything, music. So this
Richard, I believe you have a journalist background. Maybe you want to answer to this?
Well,
No, I don't.
My eyebrows did go up a little bit. I don't generally consider, I've been in journalism for 25 years, and as much as journalists get a hard time now and seem to be in the crosshairs all the time, I've never had any doubt about the integrity of anyone that I've worked with. And in almost every newsroom I've been in, anyone who has an agenda doesn't last long. Every newsroom I've ever worked in, the idea is to figure out the truth and tell that story. So there isn't, most people don't have something they're trying to push particularly, at least in my experience.
Barbara, so you documented refugee lives in camps. We're going to watch right now the trailer of a trilogy that you produced and directed called Exile, and then I will ask you a couple of questions after that.
المشاعر هي مختلفة، في الشعور بالحنين، الشعور بالانعزال، الشعور بالعودة، يعني الأمل بالعودة، الشعور بالانتظار، أكثر من المشاعر. يعني هون نسيج من المشاعر بيكون في لحظة واحدة.
It's not easy to be a refugee. It's hard to be homeless. You don't have home, you don't have anything. We left everything behind us and we came holding only one bag.
أنا كنت تاجر سجاد. كنت تاجر سجاد. أنا الحمد لله كنت وصلت تقريبا لمحافظة درعا. ما معنا شيء، ما معنا شيء. جيت لهون يعني عم بطلب المساعدة من الأردن، من الأمم المتحدة.
ما خلوناش نجي باقي معانا. وشحتنا معي شحنة. كان في قناص مع عندنا. كانت خالتي تروح تجيب لنا أكلات والقناص ضرب عليها.
We need just somebody to defend us. Just defend us. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says the most punishment is losing a home. It's the most punishment. Yes. And we lost our homes.
Barbara, how do you choose to tell a story over another one? And then I want to ask you, how much do you let your personal emotions, because I believe that at some stage of filming this, you must feel somehow. So how much do you let your personal emotions guide and influence you through the production and the post-production?
I think that the most important thing is to go in a place without expecting. And I want to, sorry for before, I was thinking in a different way. Because in Italy, journalism, it's very different than in US. So I am saying this. Yeah, but the fact is that what I want to do, what I do usually, I go in a place without expecting anything. Mm-hmm. And I try to be like how I can say, a sponge?
A sponge?
A sponge?
Mm-hmm.
Sponge, yeah, okay. Like a sponge to try to absorb the maximum that I can in any situation. So this is the most, for me, is the most important thing, to go very clean, do you know, with a very clean mind and with a very clean heart, and just put myself at the service of the story. The other fact is that after is the worst, because when you arrive and everything is new and you try to understand what's going on in a situation, you are, you know, trying to get everything we were talking before, and you need more time all the time, and you try to do the best with what you have and with the time that you have to connect with people, to let the people understand that you are there because you want to be of some service for you. You don't want to do you know, your movie. You want just to be their voices, mm-hmm. and to be, you know, to give them the possibility to let their voices be heard by someone, you know. So, and this is not easy, especially when you go in a place where people are arrived after. For example, this one is the refugee for wars. So they were there because they were escaping from their home, and they are not really open to tell you. And sometimes, yes, because they are, you know, stressed by the story, but also sometimes they are looking at you with, you know, some suspect because they don't know what to wait. So if you don't have enough time, you are, you know, it's not nice. But the worst is not there. The worst is after, during editing, because during editing you have so much material that you have to decide what to cut. And you have to create your story. How I can say, you have to be faithful to what you see, but you are also, you know, manipulating the story to let the people understand what you felt over there. So from my point of view, I am Western, I am from Italy. Italy is one, you know, we are a bridge for migration. We are one open door to Europe. So I have all time in mind how my fellow Italians and how my fellow mm-hmm. Europeans and can understand. So I'm trying all time, and I know that I cannot be, you know, totally neutral, but I have to let them understand. So I use music, I use many kind of things just to effects, just to let them understand what can happen. But it's not easy, I have to tell you. And I did three documentaries about refugees and 10 documentaries about human rights all over the world, going all the time in very hard situation, and at the end it's very hard.
Overall, how long did you spend with these families at the camps?
So this movie, especially this one, has been filmed in Turkey, and the refugee camp, Syrian refugee camp in Jordan, at the very beginning of mm-hmm. the first arrival. So the camp was big. It was already nearby 1 million people, but after become bigger and bigger. In Dadaab, that is mm-hmm. in a Somalian refugee camp, and they are there since 91. So, and where it was also, I don't remember. Palestine. Oh yes, and I went in Jordan in the Palestinian refugee camp that are no longer refugee camps. Mm-hmm. Now they are part of Amman. So this is a different situation. So I was spending I think something as a couple of months in
each place.
like 5 days in a camp, 1 week in another one, another week in another one, and so on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Is there anyone who would like to comment or add anything to what Barbara said or to what you just saw?
I thought it's very powerful stuff, and I definitely empathise with the challenge of, having an agenda, or not an agenda, but a timeline that doesn't always allow you to do all you'd like to do. And I've made movies myself. I do have a little bit of a movie-making background. I made movies for the United Nations, and oftentimes so much of what you shoot is incredibly beautiful and touching footage, and it just gets left behind. And it's just in your own personal archive. So I definitely sympathise with what gets chopped from it. Because sometimes the best stuff, but it doesn't quite fit the message.
I agree. Well, Richard, we are going to talk about your work now, even though you were reluctant to come tonight. But I have to say that I love your storytelling approach, because in this digital era, you have chosen to use your pencil to tell stories. And as written in your bio, to fill an emotional void in the regular news cycle. I like that. So we are going to play in loop your illustrations. So I would like you to take us through the drawing process, and especially how do you capture these emotions, since they're not speaking, they're not talking, there is no voice, it's just drawing right now. And maybe what are the most difficult emotions to capture? And finally, I'm very curious to know what happened between you and your subject as you're drawing them. Do you have a conversation? What happened? What kind of interaction do you have with them?
I've already forgotten the first two questions.
I can repeat them.
So these are, so you're looking at a really odd cross section. So I don't know if we can freeze on any number of these. I was only kind of peripherally aware of what tonight was, and only peripherally involved in choosing the images, so I didn't really know what to expect. This is a young refugee in Rome from last year, working with Leonard and IOM for a company called McKinsey, which had put together a big report on refugees and the positive effects that migration can have to a country that accepts migrants. And I pointed out at a meeting that it was great data and very interesting, but completely devoid of any humanity whatsoever. So I suggested, you should really send someone to go interview lots of refugees and talk to them and do some stuff. So they said, okay, off you go. And so this, what Barbara and I were talking about is that limited timeline. I had a very limited timeline, and I shot around Rome and Germany and Canada, some ways collecting friends, because when you're a migrant like I am, many of your friends are migrants too, so it was easy to collect these stories. But these were from Rome, from I guess a camp within Rome itself, where they shuffle migrants through before they move on, just to give them some security.
Center, yeah.
And this kid was just sitting with his suitcases waiting to move on. Sorry, I can't remember what else you've got here. So
yeah, maybe this one. I don't know.
so this, okay, let's do this. This is a good one. So jump back one. Yeah. So. And forward one. Sorry, the chap who's sitting with his head down. Where is he? So some of what I do is very much live drawing. So this is a live sketch in Afghanistan. During this period, the Canadians were there after they were no longer involved with direct conflict in support of ISAF. They took on a training mission, and they had to build battalions of Afghan soldiers. And they had to build dozens of battalions of Afghan soldiers in I think on a 2 to 3 year timeline. They had to turn them around. So they were taking kids who, many of the kids were shepherds or from outside of the large cities, bringing them in, shaving their heads, giving them 6 weeks basic training, and then they were basically loaded up onto trucks, and that was it. They were a battalion. They all went out. They didn't have their extended military specialist training. So they ship them out at night, about 3 o'clock in the morning. They load them all into trucks, and they go to wherever their eventual posting is going to be for that battalion. And many of these kids are still look like they're shell-shocked. So this is the middle of the night, and they ship them out at the middle of the night because otherwise these battalions of brand new recruits are just big targets for IED strikes or mortar attacks. And so these kids were all sitting around. So this was a basic sketch that I worked on live and then took some photographs and worked on it afterwards.
How long did it take you to get this sketch?
So I this probably 15 to 20 minutes worth of sketching in there. So I'm fairly fast now. I have sketched in some absolutely ludicrous places. I've sketched on board helicopters. I have sketched while walking. So I can sketch almost anywhere. And in some ways, it's not necessary to be a good artist. It's just necessary to draw in the moment wherever you can, because whether you do it well or badly, you still capture some essence of what's going on at the time. And so this just seemed like, he was in the only lit area was like a garage, and there were dozens of these kids all just sitting on the floor looking completely shell-shocked. So they were,
Were you
artistically
talking to him?
it's gold.
Were you talking to him as you
Talking
were
to them through an interpreter, yeah. So in this particular case, I didn't talk to this kid. I talked to his sergeant, and I ran the interview of his sergeant with this illustration. So some of what you've chosen here, generally my process is I go and embed somewhere, spend a long period of time to the point where I become basically wallpaper, and they just ignore me. And it works the same no matter where I go. And after long enough, people let their guard down and forget you there, and you can then begin to get some really intimate material once they no longer notice you're there. So you can play on. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions on these.
What are the most difficult emotions to capture?
I don't attempt to capture any emotions. I don't, ridiculously, I don't really consider myself an artist either. I'm a decent renderer, and I have a good feeling for accuracy. You can stop on this one if you can, thanks. I have a good feeling for accuracy, but if you attempt through your skill set to accurately capture what it is you see in front of you, then you capture whatever's there anyway. I don't give my opinion to what they're feeling. This is Jimmy and Fausto, his bomb-sniffing dog. And so we'd just come back from, I think, an overnight patrol. And so everybody's kind of dog-tired, not to create a pun, not intentionally anyway. And these guys were great. They're just a fantastic team and entirely essential when patrolling, because the enemy no longer makes mines that are made of metal, so you can't find them with metal detectors. It's up to the dog to find them. So he's an essential tool in patrolling in Afghanistan. And Jimmy brought his dog back with him, and I met him here back to D.C., and they went on tour of various facilities where people could meet him and his dog when he came back to the U.S.
Okay. Any one of you wants to comment on these illustrations? I know that there's just a small sample.
I try very hard to draw live in almost every situation. Sometimes it is impossible. But in those situations, I was a journalist, so I'm reporting for the next day's newspaper. So I have to be producing all the time. So at times when I have to draw from a photograph, which you had of the old man in the village where we were on patrol, and I took that photograph, and within 24 hours I'd created that art, and it went back with the story of that day's patrol. And that's kind of I try and operate as quickly as a photographer would, as a journalist would.
Veyron, I think you want to say something.
Richard, I think you're quite a great artist.
He's very modest,
I love
right?
all of your... Well, you see something, and as clearly I can see, you saw something, and you captured it very well in 5 minutes, and that's...
With a video camera, you would see the same thing, and you'd lock on it with the video camera. I just do it with a pencil is all.
You're doing a great job, and just wanted to say it's a great art you do. The moment you see that and you capture it, that's how you do it. That's your eye and your vision, and we appreciate it.
You don't need a camera, right?
I don't always need one, but it's interesting what you said, because it's such a tactile thing in this digital age, and that it is a way, for some reason, there's something about when you see a sketch like this, it's obvious like a period of time has been spent with someone, right? Sure. And So it's fairly intimate, and for some reason that translates to the viewer as well. So they get more out of it, I think, than a photograph. Sure. There's something about it as a timeline of a period spent together that people really latch onto. So it has a certain intimacy and has a way of pulling people in and making them lean forward and read a story. Now, I don't know if that's a gimmick, because, like you said, it's in a digital age, it's very weird, and I often get the response that, hey, this is really cool, we should do this more, and then that's the end of it, I never hear of it again. And that's happened so many times, so I feel like I'm constantly, proving the concept again and again and again. Mm-hmm. But really, for this group, for filmmaking, for photography, it's a matter of using all avenues to get the message out, right? Whether it's podcasting or video or art or the suitcase art, it's just a way of making people care about topics they didn't know they needed to care about. Absolutely. And that's our job. Mm-hmm.
And also, if I could just comment, it's so fascinating to me how, Richard and Barbara, how you approach your subjects and how you kind of establish that trust. For you, it's going straight to a refugee camp as an outsider and figuring out how do you get these stories out. Because that's a very difficult thing to do, I think. Because these individuals, and speaking from personal experience, it's very, people are very suspicious of who wants their story. And right now, all around the world, the refugees and migrants, everyone wants their stories because that's what's hot right now. And so it's really interesting, how you embed yourself within that community and establish that trust and be able to give voice. Because at the end of the day, I don't think you don't want to claim that voice and make it your own, but you're simply trying to provide a platform. And I think with you, Richard, it's really interesting how you stay in a place and stay there so long that they almost forget about you, which is interesting in that, that in of itself is establishing an intimacy, but an intimacy that you're really not directly involved in, but it's an intimacy that you're almost observing. So I think both approaches are powerful in their own way, but it's just super interesting to see how you can make art accessible to communities that are going through tough times.
I want to ask a question to you and Veyron before we open to Q&A. Ahmed, you are a refugee from Iraq. Veyron, you said it, you are a refugee from Iran. So at what moment you say to yourself, I have to start sharing my story? And how do you share your story without being reduced to the term refugee?
So this is my whole life I knew I have messages and work to give people, and I felt myself very responsible to do that because I always knew there's something in my mind going on and I wanted to do it. But more of it in a peaceful message. I knew the world needs peace. But it happened for me to have some problem because of my sexual orientation in Iran. I've been arrested, just accused of being gay, made me in trouble, and have put me in jail for 45 days, the worst time of my life. And after that accident, let's call it, or discrimination, I've got very much more eager to help put my message out there. And actually, I try to change my mediums. I'm more of a surreal person, and my art is just what it is, comes from naturally from me. But once that happened, when I escaped and I went to Turkey, I decided to make a short film. Otherwise, I never done it, and I decided to write something. I decided to target my audience. I said, all right, all of these things happened to me, so what am I going to do is, if I go to America and make a film and put it there, people are going to watch it and love it. I said, no, that's not going to help because they're already more fine. There's more fine. I need to help those people which are not getting these, and, they need help because they caused problem for me, and all of those things happen for me. So I thought I should make a film for them to see, and it might have even like for a little effect on them. That's what I want. So I try to write something with their perspective and write something very smooth that they can see. And I targeted my audience for the film very specifically. I made a short documentary about 6 Iranian LGBT refugees in Iran. And the story is very short, and all of these 6 people, the whole idea is that their whole life is one. It can be one. All of their story, can be a story for another refugee, especially the LGBT ones. And I decided to study and study about my people, about Iranian people, my language, to see how they get affected and how can I change their minds, change their point of view or perceptions. So I wrote something very poetic. And I made a performative documentary instead of making a documentary, because I knew that type of documentary, if I go and interview gay people and tell them, share your experience and what you've been through, I decided to not do that, because I've seen in other films that it's even make homophobic people more angry. It's even make them hate us more. So I said, yeah, I should do something that it affect them and it might change their mind. So I tried to be poetic and in their mind and something very smooth and not judgmental, and so that came out of it. But it's totally it's just depends on the target and the audience. And that's why I picked that. And I think each film has its own audience, and it depends on the filmmaker as well. But I feel like it's just, we can do in any, as Ahmed was saying, in any platform, we put our messages there.
Ahmed.
So sophomore year of high school, a family friend came over for dinner, and he said, hey, why don't you start writing about your story? And at the time, I was 15, 16, I thought, why? Why is my story any different from anyone else's? And at the time, as a teenager, you don't really want to, still a teenager, I can't say as a teenager, you don't want to think that you're different from anyone, right? So you don't want to separate yourself from the group you're already a part of. But I thought, okay, all right, I'll try it. And then when I started writing about my experiences through Iraq, Syria, and finally America, and sharing that work with friends and peers, all of a sudden I realized that their minds were changing about these different identities that I was a part of, whether it's the Iraqi one, the American one, or simply the refugee experience, or being a Muslim, what have you. And so I realized that there was an opportunity here. There was an opportunity and a responsibility to be able to exist in all of those worlds simultaneously and be able to relay them to those around me. And so that was kind of the initial decision. That's how it happened. I thought, okay, well, I actually do have a story to tell, and let me tell it and empower myself by empowering those around me. And to your second question, this is something that I continue to struggle with, is how do you get your message across and going beyond the label. One of the individuals I interviewed for the Unpacked Refugee Baggage exhibit, his name is Joseph from the Congo. And as we were talking, I asked him a similar question about that word refugee. What does it mean to you? And he said, the word refugee is like wearing, it's like clothes. It's like clothing that you wear. And he said, when I came to America, right when I entered the airport, I took that label and those clothes off. And so, people have differing relationships with the words migrants and refugees that come from those communities. But for me, it's where the conversation starts. I don't want to be known as a refugee or a former refugee for the rest of my life. I want to be known for my work, for my art, for my writing, and for my efforts to empower those around me. So it's a tough question. I haven't found the answer yet. But I think as we continue to take on more projects that relay to storytelling and empowerment of those communities that need to be given a voice, we'll get closer and closer to that answer.
To make sure that we remain on time, we are going to open it to Q&As, question and answers. So we're going to start with a first round of questions, 3 questions at once. Please, if you could introduce yourself, keep your comments brief, and if you ask a question to one of our panelists, please mention who the question is directed to.
Thank you. My name is Emiliano. I'm Italian and I'm a journalist, but we're not here to talk about that, so don't worry. Thank you for your words. I would start from Veyron. Today, you could not be here because the Supreme Court, a few days ago, gave a green light to the so-called travel ban. So thanks, you are here now. But we are in a country, we are talking about a country that is slamming the doors in front of immigrants and refugees. Why we are discussing here, the President of the United States delivered a statement saying that what's happened this morning in New York is because of security and immigration. And you already asked the Congress to stop the family and large chain immigration. That's an example. So it's interesting to have this kind of discussion, but the reality is that the storytelling requires us to sit here for a while, and in 140, now a little bit more characters, the President of the United States is saying that the problem is to close basically the doors in the face of immigrants and refugees. So the perception, I close with my question, we have this kind of works, artworks, documentary, draws, whatever, and this is a good discussion, but then we have somebody that gives a completely distorted perception of who are refugees, who are immigrants. I had the chance to be often in Africa or in the Middle East roots, talk to these people. Of course, there is ignorance, but now we are talking about a different environment where the leadership, the political leadership, is selling us a completely distorted vision of who are immigrants and refugees. How can we react with this nice short storytelling? Shall we go in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Oklahoma to show this kind of very nice documentary to those people thinking that the only solution is the wall?
Thank you, Emiliano. Someone else? We have a question here.
Hi, my name is Emma. I'm from New York, moved to D.C. recently. My question is, how do you view the ephemerality or permanence of your work in terms of its kind of impact, and how long of a timeline do you expect your works to echo?
Hi, I'm Reed from the Child Labor Coalition, which is based here. I'm worried about the impact of the camps on children. We've heard a lot of anecdotal stories about children in the from Syria who are in camps, and they are very vulnerable to child labor and to child marriage. And I was wondering if anybody had any experience with that issue.
Okay, so we will be, Veyron, I believe the first question was addressed to you. Do you want to go ahead?
All right. As you're a journalist, and I work for Voice of America Television, and as a producer, and every day I see so many news, and I try to go over all of them, but I'm not trying to judge and make decision what is right and what is not to right, but just to produce. And I believe we make film to impact people, and we just put it out there. We hope some messages are need to be viewed as fast as possible, because they're hurting, they're causing problem, as you said, and I just feel like it's our responsibility to raise our voice, not to protest and to just resist. I believe not to just show that this is not something that we can avoid. We just have to save lives, no matter how. I honestly can't specifically answer the question, except that we just have to find ways to show what is right and what is not right. That's what I say.
And if I can quickly add to that, I'm sorry.
No, thank you, actually.
I think it's important to note that, you know, what you mentioned, you said, do we go to Wisconsin, do we go to Pennsylvania, and do we show these films, and how do we change the mind of individuals that think the wall is the solution. I don't think that all of those individuals in those states think the wall is the solution per se. I think first, as artists and as individuals that deal with these narratives that need to be dispersed across the world and across the states, when we think of the political climate now, I think it makes the work even more necessary and even more urgent. And even more than that, I think as we think about the ways of reaching out to people from the other side, people that may think that immigrants or migrants are negative or have negative effects on society, I think when we present the narratives through multiple lights, for example, there are aspects of the refugee and migrant experience that anyone can relate to, regardless if they're in Pennsylvania or New York City. So how do we tap into those similarities and present them in the widest form? That's the issue, and that's the challenge that we have ahead of us. And I think if we succeed in finding that sweet spot and really making these journeys universal or certain aspects of them universal, then we can reach out to the other side by involving them in the conversation rather than having them be this separate entity that we have to continuously battle with.
I believe the second question of Emma was about how do we ensure that this movie have a long-lasting impact, right, Emma? No.
Actually, what is your perspective on the ephemerality or permanence? So, like, do you even have the intention of ensuring a long-lasting impact? How do you think about, like, the kind of timeline here?
Someone wants to take that question. Richard? I see you.
I'm not sure if this was aimed at me particularly, probably not is my guess, but I'll have a go anyway. Artistically, I spent some time in the Smithsonian Museum of Armed Forces History, and they have, underneath the museum, they have vaults filled with drawings. And I spent some time with some drawings from the First World War that were done live on the battlefront. And the beauty of those drawings is that you can look at photographs from the First World War and you would know it was from the First World War, even if it didn't have anything. You'd know the period because it'd be sepia tone, it'd be kind of cracked looking, you'd know instantly when it was from. But the power of drawings for me is that they could have been drawn yesterday. And those drawings from the First World War, when you look at them, you can see every scratch on the paper that the artist made. And so they have this way of taking you right back to that moment again and again and again with that same kind of visceral, slap in the face if the image is good enough. So I hope that my work has that kind of, longevity. I can't say for sure, but that would be my hope, that it still grabs people years from now.
Barbara, do you want to say something quickly?
Yeah, I think that a movie or a documentary or whatever, it's like a picture of that precise moment. So the importance of this is that it's freezing a period. So even if probably in 5 years, what I hope everything will be solved, but it will be always, a very important document of what we were and where we are now. So I think that this is a little. After, the other fact is that what we are trying to do is to be distributed and to be viewed by the biggest number of people that we can reach. And this is what we are trying to do, because this is the importance of this, to trying to be spread around. And after, in 5 years, the movie will be, for all of us, we hope that this issue will be overcome, and everything will be solved. But in a way, it will be like a piece of history. Sorry.
I believe the last question was about refugee camps and children's violations. So, have any of you has any experience?
Yeah, I can speak from my experience. I can say, and after we have our friends here that can speak also. But from my perception, what I saw, the life in refugee camp it's terrible for kids, but it's terrible for everybody. Because if you think that you have people arriving in tents that are, built, are perfect because these people need a shelter. So, and they need to be helped, especially the one that I visit. But they are not supposed to stay there for example, 40 years, as happened in Dadaab. In Dadaab, these tents and these places were just done for helping people as a first shelter, And after, because there's a very difficult situation and it's impossible to solve in a political way. So I think that what the organization as IOM or UN or Red Cross, they are doing an enormous, amazing work trying to help these people at the first arrive, when they first arrive, but after politicians has to solve the situation and they have to work together because you cannot leave people for 40 years inside the refugee camp. Mm-hmm. For kids, it's terrible because they arrive over there, they have, for young kids, okay, they find a lot of kids. They can play, and all the people staying there, or there's a lot of volunteers that are doing amazing job. The worst is for people Veyron age and Ahmed age, because they arrive from university. They, for example, the kids that I was interviewing, they had to flee from their homes in Aleppo while they were missing just 2 exams to be graduate, and they lost their passport during the bombings. So they were stuck in Syria, and they cannot do anything. They cannot keep going with their exam. They cannot go abroad. They cannot go in another country. So the other fact about child marriage, I really don't know. I didn't go inside that. But the life in refugee camp, it's terrible. So this is why all these people is trying to arrive in Europe, or they are trying to come here because they want to start again their lives. This is the fact. They are not trying to steal anything.
Maybe, Ahmed, I know that you were never in a refugee camp, but you were displaced as a child. So maybe there is a few words that you would like to say here.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was very lucky in a sense that my parents really kept a lot of the world shielded from me and my little sister as we were going from Iraq to Syria and eventually to America. But I think just finding communities of displacement as you are being displaced is something that's incredibly, incredibly helpful. And now I really take it upon myself to reach out to those communities and really give back, realizing kind of my privilege of being able to exist in this country and contribute in any way that I can. So I think just communities of displacement as you're moving from one place to another are incredibly important. But that's not to say that that everything is good and rosy. No, it's not. It's really, really difficult to be in that situation. But I think community is something that is really, really incredibly helpful as we go through these processes of displacement.
We don't have time for 3 additional questions, but if there is one question, we can take one final question. To the young woman here in the center.
Hi, I'm a communicating with communities specialist, which is a branch of humanitarian communication in which you not only, I'm sure IOM knows about this, not only are providing information to refugees in crises, or to people in crises, but also figuring out how to give them a voice, give them the pen, the video camera, the iPad, the virtual keyboard, I guess, these days, to let them express themselves. And I've worked in Greece and I've worked in Jordan a couple of times, and one of the problems we always have is getting the voices of female refugees. So I know it's somewhat ironic asking the panel this question. Maybe there's someone in the audience as well who might have ideas. What are ways you can think of to get those voices, especially in cultures where perhaps the females aren't put forward as readily, or the females don't want to be put forward or want to be, in that spotlight?
I think
Do you want to say?
that's a good question about women, because in my country there's a big discrimination actually against women, and the fear of them being free and being having their thought and belief and live as a free person, during this all time of being limited and not be what they want, caused them to be afraid. Otherwise, for example, exactly like when I wanted to make my film, I was looking for 2 girls, and that was the hardest part of my film. I tried to find them, but I could find them, but they wouldn't be ready or willing to be in front of camera. But they wanted. I found some people they were okay for their face to be pixelated, so it just shows their fear, and that fears come from where they've been, and it's just difficult because I don't know how to say. We just have to try to find more and more until we honestly find courageous and brave women, which I'm very glad and appreciate my friends which helped me with that film, and they're absolutely brave, and that film, without them, it could have been nothing.
Leonard, maybe you want to say a couple of words.
Yeah, I mean, the issue of communicating with communities is really important. Taxpayers want to know that when aid has been given out, that it's been given out appropriately, and that the people who receive the aid have a voice in it. It's really important and difficult to do. In IOM, we're working with technology a little bit, using apps in particular. So instead of writing down on paper what people are saying, that you do it in a more rapid way, so that the community mobilizers capture the feedback. And speaking in particular of migrants in West Africa, where there's such a big crisis of the haves and the have-nots. I mean, to some of the questions raised earlier, I think we must recognize that people are feeling economic pain, not just in the countries of origin, but here too. And it's easy to get on your high horse and start pointing at politicians, but they're reflecting real pain in communities. And it's curious that incomes haven't grown in the developed world, and they haven't grown for the poorest of the poor either. So in terms of West Africa in particular, we're doing a lot of work having the migrants who've had a really tough time in Libya go home and communicate to their communities and say, well, maybe, we're for migration, but maybe that's not the best way to go right now. It's really important that that gets across as well. It's difficult to do because people follow the siren song of social media. They're tempted by smugglers. They're sold a bill of goods. There's a Pied Piper telling them there's a great life for them in Europe. It's not true. And they end up being captured by militias, being shaken down. And so it's important for the technology companies as well to participate in this communicating with migrants, so they make safe migration choices, not end up being in the hands of criminals, which is so often happening.
Thank you, Leonard.
And if I can add real quick to the issue of the female refugee, obviously this is an experience that I'm not directly involved in, but I think it's something that's super, super important when we think about how to kind of give voice to this community. Is it starts with role models, and right now it's a huge effort is underway to empower female refugees. A couple examples that come to mind, obviously Malala and the Malala Fund are doing some incredible work, but also Muzoon Al-Mlehan, the Goodwill Ambassador for UNICEF, is doing some really, really amazing work with female refugees and education. So I think and IOM is doing some incredible work as well with just getting someone from that community to not only represent, but also give voice to communities that they're directly involved in. So kind of moving away from having representatives that are removed from the communities and switching into representatives that are actually part of those communities. So those communities can see a role model and realize that that person is not an exception, but they can actually be the rule.
Thank you, Ahmed. Well, it's time to wrap up our panel discussion. So we are running out of time. Our guests are staying with us. We have a cocktail reception. Please join us. You can ask your question after. we finished. So thank you again for being with us tonight. Right now, it's time to welcome our keynote speaker, Laura Thompson. She's the Deputy Director at the International Organization for Migration. Laura.
Good evening, everybody. Probably the last thing that you want is to hear another speech now. After this very interesting discussion at the panel. And I would like to start by thanking all of the panelists to be here tonight with us. It has been really great to have all of you, to have your experiences shared with us. And I will ask all of you to give an applause to all of them, please. It is really touching when you see these type of examples and the real people telling stories about their real lives. And I think the film helped all of us today to really connect with some of these cases. And as it was explained during the panel, I felt also extremely connected with the film, and I hope that that was the same experience that you had here. And we had tonight the experience of two young men that are refugees, but we are celebrating Migrants Day, and this population is a much larger population. We have something around 250 million people today that are international migrants that have crossed borders, and they don't live in the country of origin. And a large number of those, I would say the majority of those, move in regular ways and are doing normal jobs in the communities and do have bring a lot of new ideas, a lot of new good things into their communities, into the communities of destination, and also they help very much to connect between communities of origin and communities of destination. There is a large number also of people that have been forcibly displaced, either internally within their own countries or throughout borders. And we, according to the UNHCR, the Agency for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the number is about 65 million people that have been forcibly displaced, somewhere around 40 million that are forcibly displaced within their own countries, and the rest of them, 25 million that are either refugees or asylum seekers somewhere else in the world. And despite the fact that today I think there is a general understanding of the positive elements that migration bring. I'm not talking about forced displays, because this is very often puts a lot of strain in the people, in the countries that receive the people as well. But the normal migration movements, the regular migration movements, and everybody agrees in general terms that it is a very positive element in the world. There is constantly and very much present, particularly a very negative public perception about what migrants are, what migration is, the difference of the people that are coming. And we saw how those feelings affect communities, both communities of destination, as well as the people themselves, the ones that feel that they feel constantly different. And I can tell you that having a name like Laura Thompson with this accent normally doesn't match. So every time that I open my mouth, people are still thinking, where is she from? And just for you, so that you start listening to me and stop thinking of where am I from, I am from Costa Rica. And my great-great-grandfather went from Scotland to Costa Rica long time ago, and I really don't want to know why. But these are the feelings that you have all the time when you do feel different, and when people look at you like thinking, where is she from? So I would say that probably one of the most difficult things that my organization, the International Organization for Migration, does is to battle these misperceptions and these myths that exist around migration is probably, I would say, the most difficult thing. And we really need to break away from this idea of migrants as criminals, migrants as using or abusing of our systems, migrants as burdens for the society. And we have to recognize what the real migration is, the needs that exist, the demographic needs, the economic needs, the labor needs that exist in our countries, and how much this variety of people that have arrived to the different countries have made richer our societies. And this migration festival, Film Migration Festival, is about that. It's just about trying to use ways of showing to people in different ways, and I think it was very clear during the presentation of the panel, or the discussion of the panel, how you use different ways to show different people that are sensible to different things, how you show that these are the positive elements about migration. This is the richness that turns around migration and that make people better in the new societies, as well as the societies better because of the richness of the diversity. And these ways of showing, I think, play a key role. And storytelling, we talked about a lot about storytelling, is been present in humankind throughout the history, and is part of what we need to do. And you were talking about different places in the United States and how to convince those the other people, the ones that will not come to a film like this, and the ones that will not necessarily like a discussion like this one. And I think that's part of the population that we need to address, and we need to find different ways. There is no one solution, and there were some questions about how to do it. And I think we all have a role to play, because we have different abilities. Certainly mine is not storytelling, as you can see, and it's not drawing, for sure, but we all do have different ways of passing those messages. What is important, I think, is that we feel that is the right message to pass, and that we bring and become part of those that are really passing the message of the positiveness of diversity, of the richness that it brings, and of the realities that the world in which we live today are, and what we can bring or make all together about it. So to conclude, I just want to say that a lot is heard about the negatives of migration. We have to all remember that migrants, refugees, are human beings like you and me. We saw two of them today here, and two fantastic young men that represent, for a lot of us, real stories of people that have feelings, have fears, have expectations, and are, the majority of them, the only crime that they have done is to cross a border to look for a better life for them or for their families, something that I think all of us would have done if we felt that where we are is not the right place in order to get that better life for all. So I hope that you really enjoyed the film, the panel discussion, and really thank you very much for having joined us. What we need is a lot of people like all of you to come, to get convinced, and to pass the message. We need a lot of ambassadors of this type of narrative, a positive narrative about diversity, a positive narrative about migration. And I hope that after this, you are going to become part of this big group of ambassadors that we are looking for. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the evening.
Quickly, thank you everyone for coming tonight. Please join us upstairs. We have a cocktail reception. Enjoy the rest of your evening.